It's a public health crisis of massive proportions.
You've probably heard about the water crisis in Flint, Michigan.
It's possible every single person living in Flint may have been exposed to lead through the city's contaminated water supply.
The state knew about it and did nothing.
Of the water supply in Flint, Michigan has sparked outrage across the country.
In Canada, people are also unknowingly consuming dangerous amounts of lead from their drinking water. In some cities, lead levels were found to be comparable to those of Flint at the height of its water crisis.
We're probably talking about hundreds of thousands of people in the population of Canada that right now, every time they open their taps, there's a good chance that they're getting a little bit of lead coming out of that pipe.
Canadians are not being informed on when lead levels are high, not only in their homes, but in their schools and daycares.
That's Mike and Megan. They've been part of this huge year-long investigation that has involved around 130 university students and journalists who have all been investigating lead-contaminated water in Canada.
I think people are completely in the dark.
Lead has been mined for thousands of years. It was used in ancient Rome to make water pipes because the metal is flexible, highly corrosion-resistant, and cheap. Lead pipes continued to be used around the world for centuries, and eventually lead was added to other common products like gasoline and paint. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that people started to notice that it was making everyone really sick. Lead exposure in children has been linked to behavioral problems and a loss of IQ. In adults, it can cause high blood pressure, heart disease, kidney disease, and reduced fertility. Ongoing exposure to even low levels of lead can be toxic.
I would say up until the 1970s, a lot of our major cities were still using lead pipes and putting them into the ground.
In the 1970s, we started banning lead, which is why there has been a steady decline in lead blood levels since.
Lead is one that I think a lot of people thought was a solved problem, but it's not.
There are two ways lead is getting into people's drinking water. The first is that old lead pipes are aging. Water is naturally corrosive and causes pipes to break down over time, allowing lead to seep into people's water.
They were largely used not as part of the city's main distribution network, but rather the portion of the lines that connect the water mains to the properties.
You might live in an old home and you may have replaced your pipes, but it doesn't mean that you're free and in the clear unless the city has replaced their portion of the lead service line too.
You know, one of the people we interviewed said, just imagine drinking your water with a 30-foot lead straw.
The second way is through acidic source water, which is any water that has a pH level below 7. It can cause lead to leach into the water from either pipes containing lead or lead soldering. Lead is measured in parts per billion. Health Canada's guideline for acceptable lead levels in drinking water is 5 parts per billion. But both Health Canada and the World Health Organization agree that there is no safe level of lead. And the way some cities are testing for lead is problematic too. In some places, when officials are testing for lead, they do what's called a flush test, where you let taps run for 5 minutes before gathering a water sample.
That's not actually how you drink the water, so it might not be an accurate description of what your lead levels are going to look like when you are taking that first glass of water in the morning.
It's a test designed to identify whether there's a problem in the city's water, but it's not going to capture what we need to know for public health.
Even based on flush tests, lead levels in Montreal still reached an average comparable to levels in Flint when similar testing was done there. In Prince Rupert, British Columbia, and 3 cities in Saskatchewan, the investigation found that average lead levels exceeded Health Canada's guideline of 5 parts per billion.
You know, in Montreal, people were getting tested by the city. They were told, because of the testing method used, that they had a low level or an acceptable level. And then we went back and tested with different methods that are recommended by Health Canada, and we found much higher levels. So I think it's an issue about transparency versus secrecy.
There's no real federal oversight on lead levels in water. Health Canada has set its limit, but then leaves it up to the provinces to enforce them.
And that's why we're having discrepancies in different cities across the country, where there's one quality in this city versus another quality in another city.
And only Ontario makes data on lead levels public. Nothing currently requires provinces to share testing data with residents. and often they don't.
Everybody has the right to know exactly what's in their drinking water, especially if it is deemed unsafe. One of the things that cities are doing right now is adding something called orthophosphate to their drinking water. Essentially, it's an anti-corrosive, and it coats pipes over time. So if you do have lead pipes, it's kind of mitigating any issue that you might have with your drinking water, which means that more lead service lines aren't being replaced because orthophosphate is actually doing its job.
In some cases, cities are offering free filters, whether it's a water pitcher with a special filter for lead, or whether it's a filter you can add onto your tap. The ultimate solution, all the experts have told us, you have to replace the lead pipes.
But ripping pipes out of the ground is expensive. And in most places, officials wouldn't even know where to start. There's no record of how many lead pipes there are or where they are in any given city.
It is costly. It's going to cost homeowners that do this thousands of dollars that they have to shell out of their own pocket to replace their own side of the service line. And the same for the city. The city of Montreal just announced that its total cost, its estimate for replacing its side of lead service lines is now in the neighborhood of $500 million.
We've spoken to a lot of experts for this story, and some of them are calling this a public health crisis. It's going to continue to have long-term effects on Canadians, and I think people need to be held accountable for what's actually happening to people.